All right, this is the System Failure Podcast, number 75. What's up, Nate?
Hello, Brian. Good morning to you. It's the eve of a crazy snowstorm up in New England, so we are excited for that to start cracking off later tonight. But for now, it's like when you're waterboarded, and the man who's waterboarding you grabs you by the hair and pulls your head out of the ice bucket so you can breathe for a minute or two before plunging you back in. Well, we're in that weather pattern where you get one snowstorm and then a couple days later another snowstorm and a couple of days. So we've got after a winter that was very sparse in snow at the outset, since the calendar's turned over to 25, things have certainly changed. And so we're now here in mid-February, stuck in one of those weather patterns, and I've been plowing my driveway every second or third day for the past week or so. So looking forward to a monster snowstorm tonight. That should be awesome. How are you doing today, Brian?
I'm all right. So by plowing your driveway, of course, you mean, backbreaking shoveling.
Yes, I have only a single shovel and no other implements. Oh, I got some ice melt salt, rock salts to spray on, to put on the ground there. But I don't mind shoveling. It's kind of nice. Well, I work from home, and during this time of year, it's hard to get outside, to take a break from work, get outside and get some sunlight, get some vitamin D's up in your retinas. So not that there's a ton of vitamin D when it's snowy or stormy out, but it really is nice to get outside and get the blood flowing a little bit and break up my long stretches, hunched over the computer, peering into the screen. So I've been kind of enjoying the snow plowing, but get back to me in about 30 to 45 days, and once the time change happens in March and we spring forward, and then at least you have some sunlight in the afternoon. But that's when you really start pining for warm weather, and you really start to wish that you get some sunlight on your poor pasty pale legs, and wear shorts and wear a short sleeve shirt. So. But it still hasn't. It usually is about the Super Bowl when I get tired of winter, and the Super Bowl is tomorrow. So I'm glad to still be enjoying the novelty at this late date. I think I got set up for that because we didn't have snow at first. We barely got any snow in time for Christmas, and so there's been lots of excitement. It really is like the world changes when it's all snowy out. It gives me that feeling that I used to feel when I was a kid. So I think it is snow, and every time it snows, there's a nostalgia-gasm for yours truly. And so, I'm still excited, even though it's Super Bowl weekend.
Well, there is something magical about the snow. I think one thing that's underrated about snow is the sound of it snowing. It's like this crystally tinkling sound.
Yeah, like really, really quiet. Yeah.
And I'm also famous for liking plow trucks.
Yeah. Dude, I keep thinking about that. I have this desire to purchase a 1970s or 1980s Ford F-150. And so I look at them all the time. I follow the auctions online. Probably, if I could get a house, then I would, then I would pivot and also get an old 1980s Ford F-150 that to go with it, and hopefully this F-150 would smell like copper tone and Marlboro Reds. You want it to really embody the glories of the 80s. But looking at these plow trucks, I see that a lot of them have. Looking at these pickup trucks, I see that a lot of them have plow mounts on the front. They're outfitted with plow the mounts. Obviously you put the blade on. And I don't know. I was like, it might not be such a bad. It might not be such a bad thing to get a fleet of plow trucks. You could get one. I could get one, and we could just make a small business going around and plowing out all these driveways during the crazy blizzards. For you, it's more like the reason you like plow trucks is something about like. It's related to your love of Zambonis, right? There's something about clearing a surface and having it all. It's like pressure washing a deck, right? There's something inherently satisfying about the plowing process.
Yeah, well, pressure washing is kind of like a meme, like on Reddit and what have you.
There's a whole subreddit.
And plowing is like pressure washing on crack. I mean, it's like way more awesome, right?
You've also been known, Brian, to wax poetic about the glorious curl of the blade of the snow flowing off the plow blade. That's also something you've expressed interest in the past, eh?
Yeah. Well, yeah, seeing the the snow shooting off the plow blade is pretty sweet. In Home Alone 3, there's a good scene of plows rolling up as they clear the way at the end of the movie because the burglars have some microchip, for some bomb that's in the thing, and that's why they're trying to break into the kid's house. And,
is it in an RV car? Is that what the thing is? Is the chip maybe in an RV car?
And so, most people rewind the scene in Fast Times at Ridgemont High where the girl's coming out of the pool.
Yeah, what's the name of that actress? I'll think of her name in a second. Kate. Classic scene for those of us who grew up in the 80s. Yeah.
But I prefer the scene from Home Alone 3 where there's these two plow trucks rolling up.
Yeah. Brian's like, miss me with those girls in bikinis. What I need to see is the plow curling off a plow blade. Huh?
Well, to be fair, I also enjoy Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
Yeah, it's a good one. I watched Groundhog Day on Groundhog Day this past year, a movie I have not seen since I was in like high school, and it like holds up really well. They just don't make movies like that anymore that are interesting. They're all just CGI fests and with like a lot of chaotic fighting and not a lot of flawed characters in everyday towns like Puxatawny, Pennsylvania. So, all right, well, I suppose that's enough talk about plows. Brian, I understand you've got a few topics of human interest for us today.
All right. Let's see what's going on. All right. So I guess two things have been on my mind.
All right.
Well, one is that Kurt Metzger put out a comedy special. So he was making a media blitz and was on all the podcasts.
So this Kurt Metzger, just to give a little background, this Kurt Metzger is like the sidekick on the Jimmy Dore show, right?
Yeah, that's where I heard of him first.
Yeah, he was like a normie when he started the Jimmy Dore show. And now he's a crazy conspiracy theorist and the way that he rants is hilarious. And so Kurt Metzger.
It's amazing hearing him talk. He just goes from thing to thing to thing to thing, and it's kind of like Alex Jones. But
it's
better.
Very Jones-esque, totally. Yeah.
But I mean, he talks about things that seem pretty obvious, like like there's a lot of programming, and like if you're like being a priest or being like in a position of power is like about being able to get people to obey your will, and that's just is programming. And it is like crazily awesome to listen to. But what I really want to talk about Kurt Metzger though is he was on the Duncan Trussell Family Hour.
Oh, he was. Probably was a good one.
Yeah, and well, he in the last hour they talk about Jesus a lot.
Oh boy, here we go.
And so I don't know what the real story of Jesus is, and obviously there's a lot going on there we've talked about in the pod. But what he was talking about is that Jesus is forgiveness, right? It's like the embodiment of forgiveness, right?
Yeah, it's like a perfect example of forgiveness, or like the ultimate example, something like that.
Yeah, and so I think. Like we talked about Joe Dispenza a lot, and he talks about the importance of gratitude. Sorry, not gratitude. What do you?
Gratitude.
Gratitude.
Yeah, that's the word.
But I think, forgiveness is probably even more important. I don't know. I think you have to. I guess. I feel like I've been driven on by like a heart of stone most of my life, right? That's a Pink Floyd reference.
Yeah,
by the way.
Well, I was going to mention that.
From On the Turning Away.
So you feel like you've been driven by a heart of stone. All right, interesting. You are not a person I would describe as having a heart of stone. So I'm interested to hear this idea. How are you going to land this?
I don't know. Just like I think. Well, I guess like carrying on, holding like it was like my philosophy to like hold like grudges as like motivation, or like to be like motivated by revenge, like the Count of Monte Cristo.
Okay, all right.
And just like have this like seething fire deep inside as like the motivation to get to one's ends or whatever.
I see what you're saying. I just feel like Dantes is someone who also does not have a heart of stone. That's a person with a deep reservoir of emotional feelings he has to that propel him to do the things he does, right? Dantes, the main character, the hero in the Count of Monte Cristo.
You're saying he's not driven by revenge?
I'm saying he is driven by revenge and not by a heart of stone. He's driven like by emotion too, right? Like, he's not like an emotionless sociopath. He's like a person who has deep feelings about the betrayal. What's the name of Mercedes, the young lady who his friend tried to steal there? Mondego? That's the story.
Well, I'm sure you're correct, but I think in practice, if you lead a life driven by revenge, I mean, it's kind of a romantic tale, the Count of Monte Cristo,
Yeah.
where I think if you're working like a desk job and, paying rent and just leading like a normal American existence, that kind of thing can wear you down. I don't know. I was talking to, I was driving to a Magic tournament with young Drew.
Yeah. Well, shout out to Drew.
And we were talking about like, ibogaine as like a treatment for PTSD for soldiers.
Yeah, this is one of those drugs that's native to the Amazon rainforest. I don't know much about ibogaine other than that.
Well, I guess ibogaine. Well, you take ayahuasca, right? And there's a lot of like shitting and vomiting, and then you see like the winged serpent or maybe like the panther, and it comes and talks to you, and you get
Mother
into
ayahuasca.
Mother Earth.
Yeah.
Now, I believe with ibogaine, I'm not really an expert either, but I think it is also a lot of shitting and vomiting, but it's like a 2-day thing, and it's like a huge emotional ordeal. And, so these soldiers, like their soldier who got like fragged or something will come back to them and, tell them that it's okay, or, you can move on now. And then people do, and it's like really effective at, I don't know, curing people's traumas or whatever. And so it's one thing to talk about this idea of like to just like talk about someone from your past saying like it's okay now or whatever, and it's something else to like actually like feel it, which I think Joe Dispenza, I'm sure, would agree a lot with, and actually like feeling those emotions rather than, I don't know, having a heart of stone.
I see. Okay. So, yeah, so you think that what you really have to do is let go of those negative feelings about things and events that happened in the past. Like maybe let them go like a cluster of poisonous black balloons versus keeping them tied to your wrist, and harboring them, more or less what you're saying. You want to be in a forgiveness mindset?
Yeah. I don't know, if you have like a tumultuous childhood and maybe your parents got divorced, and maybe you've got some like sociopathic older brother or something.
What? Now, come on.
I don't like I just remember, I think maybe it was when we saw The Wall in 2011 with our Aunt Wanda. Oh man, I don't know if I should go. If I don't know if I would say all this, maybe I'll cut it out. I just remember these are self-replicating patterns, and it's going to be one of her children's children. I can't remember when I saw this girl. But man, she had that look in her eye, and it was a look in her eye that I've been trying to put my finger on, because like I know that look.
Okay, so this is one of our cousin's kids, like one of Wanda's kids, one of her cousins. So this is one of our cousin's children, so like our first cousins or something like that.
Yeah.
And so, how old when you remember going? This girl came with us to the wall. Came with you to the wall.
Maybe it was before, because she definitely didn't come to the show. But see, we don't see them very much, right?
Yeah.
And I just remember, I don't know, she had a look in her eye that like, man, it's like carrying, it's like that feeling of carrying this burden of feeling like unjust things have happened to you or whatever.
Wow. So you thought you detected this, huh? I mean, you very well may actually have.
I mean, and you could say that maybe I'm just projecting like something that's in my own heart. And I guess it doesn't really matter, because the truth of the situation, I have no idea what's going on there now, but I see, this Kurt Metzger brought closure to this thing from like decades ago, where I can kind of feel it now, and I can understand what it was, and it brings closure to this whole thing, as well as like all this crazy like madness and whatnot from the past and so forth.
Yeah.
So anyway, what I'm trying to tell you is that I found Jesus.
Well, so the Jesus allegory is a wedding cake of at least 3 layers, and all 3 layers have something to do with death and rebirth, right? Christianity uses resurrection as an allegory for forgiveness. Obviously, it's about the great cycles of death and rebirth. And there's at least 3. There's the one where it's about debt forgiveness and actually forgiving debts. Right? Jesus had a lot of very financial ideas that by the time St. Augustine came around, those all kind of got swept aside. And forgiveness was more about forgiveness for your moral failings and not about being forgiven for being in debt. So there's that. There's the whole Babylonian debt forgiveness transmitted through Judea to Rome. There's that layer. There's the layer of the astronomical allegory from the Babylonian and the Egyptian religions, where the sun is the best allegory there is for death and rebirth, because it's born again every day and born again every year with a dance of the seasons. And then there's the psychedelic drugs of the Mediterranean theater, which dissolve people's egos, and you take these drugs, and the thing that you think of as Brian is like gone for a certain amount of time, and you would think, and it helps you not identify as Brian. It helps you realize there's much more to you than the Brian costume you're always wearing. Let's be real. This fiction of the character of Brian was always ridiculous and never fit that well, and was always a silly fiction. And you realize that on some of these chemical drugs. And so the ergot of the grain goddess Demeter and the wine of the wine god Dionysus merged in the Christian Eucharist that we now recognize. Drink the blood and the wine. So those three, death and rebirth of ego, death and rebirth of finance, and the death and rebirth of the Son, are all allegories mixed together in this mishmash that is Christianity. And when you start thinking of it in those terms, it becomes an incredibly meaningful allegory. And arguing about whether or not Yeshua ben Yosef existed under the reign of Tiberius in Judea, the exact time as indicated in the Gospels is up for debate, but it almost doesn't really matter. The story is more true than just someone's autobiography. It's a lock that fits every key, as I like to say. It's a Jungian archetypical story. So that's pretty cool, man. I like that you were thinking about Christianity in these terms, because it is extremely functional and useful when you think about it in these terms. It's just you just have to approach Christianity with a little bit of sophistication. And it's like playing hockey without looking at the puck. It opens the game up suddenly. You're playing a totally different game. You don't have to stare at the puck on your stick. And it's the same with conceiving of Christianity as you described it in the past couple minutes. So that's pretty good, man. I think that's a really helpful and growth positive or growth promoting way to consider Christianity, this insane tradition that has been passed down to us, but has also been garbled by the priesthoods, the structures of power that you alluded to also during your diatribe there. So that's wicked exciting.
I mean, obviously, it's like this reoccurring story, Jesus. Like, as you were saying before, it's based on these other stories from the past and got repurposed by the church. It's unclear if, like, Jesus is, like, an actual person or whatnot.
Doesn't even really matter.
Yeah.
It's like the archetypical Jesus is what really matters. Sorry, you said.
And obviously, like, debt forgiveness is something we've talked a lot about on this podcast. Yeah. What you want to have is some kind of epiphany that causes, like, the feeling, and I don't know. That's what it was. It was that was good.
You have to rise above the parts of us that are red in tooth and claw. The ancient parts of us, the reptilian parts of us that want to strike back. And want to give these feelings of competition or animosity or frustration or negative feelings. And so forgiveness is like the key. That it's how you let that cluster of poisonous balloons go.
Yeah, and also just on the topic of like Jungianism. Well, so this week, I was trying to record like Magic Online videos, and I don't quite know how I want to do it because recording during the week just doesn't really work because I have to like work all day. Then coming home and doing more recording at the computer, it just puts me into a state like your brain gets jacked up and it kind of puts you into this fight or flight thing, or you just have to like ponder these little digital objects on the computer screen and think really hard about what's happening. Yeah.
This is exactly what my entire January is like, because it was a wicked busy time at work. But I also had to get out the weekly essays, also had to prepare for this podcast. And I know exactly, it's just like all day, just going and going and going and going. Yeah, so I hear you.
It's tricky because making content, it definitely, every time I put out a video, my YouTube channel, it grows a little bit. And so I really want to do it, but I also have to work. And so anyway, what I'm trying to say is it was a week of being tired as fuck. Like I just slept, I slept terribly like all week, except for Thursday night, wherein I'm just like, well, I'm going to wave the white flag and I'm just going to go to bed early. And so like on the topic of Jungianism, just what I've come to understand is like my relationship to my dreams is changing, man. like dreams, like if you have like dreams about like house that you grew up in, or like I also have a lot of dreams about being in high school.
So these are both recurring themes for you. You're saying you do a lot of dreaming about our childhood home, our high school, our formative years.
Yeah, and those dreams are really indicative of what's going on with your shadow self or whatever. Like dreams about your childhood are super important, and I think you have to pay attention to them and get into a space where you're like noticing what's going on. And my dreams just used to kind of like happen to me, but over the past couple weeks of the podcast, we've been talking about it. I don't know, it's different now. And so, like, I don't know, when I'm dreaming, I can, it's like something is, like, changing in my subconscious in these dreams. I don't know. Like, I have these dreams about high school now, and it's different now. It's not like I don't know. When I was in high school, it was like crazily stressful all the time. But now my dreams are like changing.
So it sounds like you're. I may be getting ahead of the game here, but it sounds like your something has changed subconsciously, and that is what's changed. That's what's changing your dream space. Is that where we're headed here, or am I getting too far ahead?
I guess basically, but it's more like when these dreams are happening now, I'm not just like having like an emotional reaction in them, and I just like dreaming is like the surest sign, I think, of like what we talk about in dimensionality, or like the sock puppet, or the hand puppet, the finger puppet example.
The sock puppets, you like that one? That's a good one, yeah.
Yeah, because I think it's the best way to do it. I don't think that doing drugs is actually good.
Should I here re-articulate the sock puppet analogy? I think
Sure.
It's been a couple of weeks. Well, the idea here is like dimensionality, right? So if you were, so we are 3D people. We live in 3D houses. They look like cubes. 2D people would live in a square, right? The 2D analog of a 3D cube is a square. And if a 2D person was going to experience our 3D house, they could only experience it one infinitely thin MRI layer at a time, right? They would have to experience your house, in other words, as a sequence instead of grokking it as an object, looking at it. It's just being able to perceive length, width, and depth just by looking at a thing. The 2D person can only perceive, length and width. They've got no depth. So again, they would have to perceive a 3D cube as a infinite, as a series of square slices instead of as one cube. And so you're in a lower dimensional state when you're experiencing things as an infinite series of thin slices, like the way that we experience time. And so the sock puppet analogy is just imagine you've got a sock on each hand and your hands are talking to each other, right? And if you could only experience one thin slice of reality at a time, you might think that those two hands are two individual entities talking to each other. You have to consider all three dimensions to see that both hands are actually attached to the same trunk and that one person's actually controlling them. So I like to compare, speaking with you, Brian, as if we're two sock. We have this illusion that you're Brian and I'm Nate, but really that's all a lie. Really, we're the same person. We're the same thing with two sock puppets going back and forth with each other as if we're separate entities. So that is the sock puppet analogy. And so you were saying, Brian, that dimensionality fits in with the change in relationship you're experiencing with respect to your subconscious or with respect to your dreamscape. So can you close that loop? I can't quite see how the dimensionality fits in.
Well, it's just because we are confined to our sock puppet view.
Yes, we're stuck.
It's if you're looking for some kind of sign or whatever that you are a sock puppet. I guess I think the dreams are like your best indication. Like it's just such an underappreciated phenomenon.
I think I can glimpse what you're saying here. How does a dream help you realize the illusory nature of the ego or self-identification? Is it because your 4D software is going and you're in this crazy dreamscape that feels like a reality? Or does it illustrate the illusory nature of waking life? How are you thinking about this?
Well, just because these things bubble up in your dreams that are like important. I mean, they reflect what's going on. And I think if you like write down your dreams and like talk about them, or it's some kind of divine inspiration or something coming down to you. I mean, there's like, you're like exploding head syndrome, which no one really understands. And, I guess you'd like for like an angel to come and give you some new mathematical theorem.
Yeah, just like René Descartes, right? Hanging out in Germany, the future birthplace of Albert Einstein, hanging out next to his wood stove during a snowstorm, much like the one that's coming in tonight. And he invented the philosophical and mathematical underpinnings of all of Western society in a single crazy episode of exploding head syndrome. Or at least that's what Wikipedia makes of his biography. His biographer. Anyway, are you saying here that like the thing that is Brian, the thing that you identify as Brian or that I identify as Nate is just the tip of an iceberg, and that your dreams allow you to see under the surface at the huge amount of ice that's under there and realize that you are not, there's much more to you than the individual you presumed yourself to be? Is that the sensation? Is that the way that is that what you're seeing here or thinking?
Well, I think what you're describing there is like trying to see the Tesseract And I don't think you really need to. It's just not the realm in which we operate our lives is like one of, interdimensionality so much. But I think understanding, like seeing a map of kind of how things work just would kind of explain like why this happens.
Yeah. Yes. Well, that's where I think the drugs come in handy, right? They give you them. You can get a top down. It's not going to do the journey for you, right? You're realizing that you're a sock puppet, and that all the other sock puppets you're talking to are all attached to the same thing, and that you're all one thing. It's a great realization to have. But I do feel like drugs can help you see that. It's very hard to believe if you've lived your whole life in the confining structures of reality, the conventions to which we're cultured to.
Right. So it's not really where the work is. But
that's a great way to put it. Yeah, the drugs can help you see the way, but it is not the work, as you put it in alchemical terms there.
Well, Carl Jung is just Jungianism is just really it's really important and like not something that's like understood at all.
Yes.
But this business of the shadow stuff, I guess I don't know how I'm articulating it. But I mean there's something going on there. like dreaming, like we're kind of in the waking dream right now, as I like to say. Yeah. And I imagine that like your brain, like it is like making DMT. This is what I understand is like, it's like what it's making this whole dream experience feel real, and like you're in your body and it kind of attaches you to this experience.
Or stops you from questioning it. Like you can have that in the dream state too. Like 1 minute I'll be turning off the light and saying goodnight to the lovely Tracy, and the next minute I'll be quite nude and driving the Batmobile down the streets of Gotham City. And it never occurs to me that I should stop and think about how strange that is. That's a hell of a cutscene, like a hell of a transition from one scene to the next.
Well, it is said within like Eastern traditions that there are like two kinds of dreams. There are the dreams that are where you're driving the Batmobile naked.
Yes, yeah.
But then there's these other ones that like are, you just know they're emotional and deep. Mm-hmm. And when that's happening to you, those are important, is I guess ultimately just what I'm trying to say.
I never bothered to make much of that distinction before, but like ranking dreams, I just kind of just lumped all dreams in the same category. But that's a distinction well worth making. I think that's a good point.
I don't know. So we lead these like lives of quiet desperation, and I guess just what I'm advocating for here is one is Jesus, and two is like trying to identify like what's going on with this like unionism, and I don't know. Maybe I'll have a better report next week. But these are the two things that have been on my mind.
These are great. These are great nuggets, man. This really cuts to the heart of the matter, I think. So yeah, those are some great observations to regale the system failure audience with.
Well, people I just feel like people, like, it's just life seems so, like, unremarkable in the day-to-day grind of, like, you get up, you're tired, you go to work, you drink coffee so you can crank out your crazy desk job, or, I mean, everyone, like, hates their goddamn job, right? And so, I mean, I don't know, just, like, having, like, a crazy dream is, like... it is a really good reminder, and I feel like nobody talks about it, so we're talking about it here. I think it's really important, and I guess I don't know. I'll try to come up with more stuff on this for subsequent podcasts. But I think it's really fascinating, this whole union stuff. So I don't know. I got to work on my presentation.
Yeah, dreams, like psychedelic drugs, a good way to put the grind you mentioned into perspective, right? If you can just get some perspective, if you can lend some like we can endure a crazy amount of suffering if it has a meaning or a purpose. If there's some sensible story you can tell yourself, then you can endure all manner of misfortune. So yeah, I really think that you're cutting to the quick here, to the things that really matter.
Like I was trying to say, it's about getting to the state where you're like, it's one thing to talk about your fragged army buddy telling you it's okay, but it's another thing to feel it. And it's so important to get in that emotional state of feeling. And then Joe Dispenza would say that is going to change the kind of reality that you're attracting. And so maybe that sounds crazy, but I mean, when you get into like the quantum mechanics and stuff, and I guess, I mean, doing mushrooms and seeing the Tesseract can also help you understand what's going on there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good, man. I mean, it sounds like you had one hell of a week all told, huh?
Yeah.
How did you do on yoga? Did you hit yoga like how many days out of 7 did you manage to hit that hot yoga early in the morning?
Well, it was a rough week. Another thing is they had all these sausages on sale at Whole Foods.
I can see where this story is going.
So I don't like last night. I ate these andouille sausages. They were like crazily spicy.
Andouille.
And then I was like trying to do yoga this morning. Like, well, I'm pretty sure I'm sweating out andouille sausage right now. So yeah. Anyway, so I don't quite know how I'm gonna handle the content grind, as it is fun to make Magic the Gathering videos. And well, Magic the Gathering is a great microcosm for life because it's just that like you have like a hand of 7 cards. Like if I know what I'm doing, I can play those 7 cards and guide the ship to victory. And then there's like all kinds of ways you can screw it up. But like if you know what you're doing, well, there is like a way through usually that at least is like very competitive. If you don't win, and so it's to a degree that is like you probably wouldn't expect, like what you're leaving on the table by making suboptimal plays. And so.
It makes me think of all like sports, and probably all games are this way. Ultimately, you're really, even though ostensibly at the Augusta Open, the golfers are all competing against each other. In reality, each golfer is actually competing with themselves, and that's really seems like what you're saying about Magic cards. It's ultimately it's a game against yourself, even much more than it is a game against your randomly selected opponent.
Well, I guess like a good sports analogy just is if you step on the ice with someone who's like really good at hockey, it's like unbelievable. Like you can't believe how much economy of motion they have compared to you.
That's really it. The good hockey players just they don't. My key to hockey is to hustle like a madman every step of the game so I can make up for my poor skills. But the skill players, they just make it look effortless. It's a little bit scary. Yeah,
and I guess like you want to be living life in a way that you're not just wearing yourself down to a nub, and you want to have that economy of motion somehow. And I think not carrying around crazy burdens is like a big part of it. And so the Jungianism and Jesus can help you if that's something you're dealing with. Yep.
Well, man, this all sounds really constructive, man. You've had like, it doesn't sound like you had the easiest week of all time, but it sounds like your head's in a good spot.
Yes.
Yeah. Man, that's really interesting. I love the idea that you're saying you found Jesus. It makes me think of that Eminem lyric, please, Lord, this boy needs Jesus. That's how I feel about you.
Yeah.
All right, well, I think that puts a bow on that section, Brian. I think that it's time to open the Pandora's box of today's episode, which is, of course, and inevitably, USAID. All over the news this week. I guess the Donald's ally, Elon Musk, has up and virtually shut down USAID. So I thought maybe we would just start with a brief history of that not-so-august organization, just to give us a flavor of what we're talking about when we talk about USAID. And I must say, having been on the Wall Street Journal now and no social media for a couple of weeks getting my news, it's a little disturbing how much of this is left out of our mainstream media outlets. So you'll hear me inject a few points when I say according to the Wall Street Journal X or according to the Wall Street Journal Y.
You've done a deep dive on USAID, it seems.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was a fascinating week, so this is what captivated my attention.
All right, well, what have you got for us?
Well, USAID was invented in 1961 by John F. Kennedy Jr. It was signed into law via executive order at the height of the Cold War, as mentioned in 61. USAID supposedly distributes money worldwide to worthy causes. So the way that it is characterized, its surface level is that it's a big charity that distributes in billions of dollars worldwide. But according to the Wall Street Journal, less than 10% of U.S. non-military foreign aid actually ends up with any locally based organizations. Most of it never leaves the U.S., and to quote the Wall Street Journal, it circulates among well-heeled USAID subcontractors instead. So two big moments in the history of USAID recently came in 14 and 20, respectively. In 2014, we may all recall, in the Ukraine, they had a little thing called the Maidan Revolution. Maidan is the Ukrainian word for a public square, I guess. That's why they call it that revolution. And one of the fascinating things about WikiLeaks is that we got this phone call between Victoria Nuland and the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Jeffrey Pyatt. And in that conversation, you can hear them plotting out the future of the Ukrainian government at the height of the Maidan Revolution, right? So the point here is that this Maidan Revolution was not something that was organized organically within the borders of Ukraine. It was organized with funding from USAID.
Yeah, well, I heard like Dave Smith talking about this, and well, the big thing is like, how do you keep like a protest going through a Ukrainian winter where it's like crazily cold, and so I guess they brought in like heaters and other things to, because it's just not like a natural protest.
Yeah, that's what Newland was doing. She's out there handing out sandwiches to keep the protest rolling through the dead of winter. Now, the lead up to these protests, Ukraine is a country that has a lot of ethnic Ukrainians in the western reaches, and to the eastern reaches, it's got a lot of ethnic Russians living there. And the Ukrainian government under, Viktor Yushchenko, they agreed to make a deal with Putin and the Russians versus making a deal with the EU. Right? They had competing offers on the table from like the World Bank and the IMF and the Western apparatus of finance, and they had a better offer with Russia. And so when the Prime Minister of the Ukraine took that Russian offer, with the help of Victoria Nuland, the State Department, and funded by USAID, Ukraine took to the streets. And eventually, Yushchenko fled to Russia when the political chaos reached fever pitch. He fled Russia. Protesters stormed the government buildings in Kiev, and Western governments rushed to recognize those protesters as the new Ukrainian government and certified them as the new leaders of Ukraine before anything could really be done. And that set up the confrontation with Putin between the Ukrainians that we're living with today.
So is this like disputed on the Wall Street Journal? Or
none of this is disputed anywhere.
Because it seems like when people like, oh no, America's not meddling in Ukrainian politics, but it seems like obvious that we are.
Right. And it's like Clapper, the former director of the CIA, going before Congress and making the rounds. But yeah, we're totally not collecting everyone's phone call information. It's like just a lie. It's no one. What is the name of St. Pierre, the Karine St. Pierre, the White House press secretary? She'll come out and toe the party line, but like no one believes these things. Right? No one believes the U.S. isn't actually illegally collecting all of our data. Right? Everyone knows at this point. And I think that this business where we go around and muck with, foreign governments and elections, we promote quote unquote democracy around the world. Even though it's really we're supporting dictators, whoever's in support of our economic interests, that's who we support. So it's just really critical to understand that USA. So today, up until this past week, 90% of Ukrainian media was funded by USAID. 90% of the Ukrainian media funded by USAID. That's what this organization is doing. So that's our 2014 history of the Maidan Revolution and USAID being involved there. So now let's wind the clock forward to 2020, I think a year we all remember. Because the USAID, USAID is how Peter Daszak at EcoHealth Alliance got funding for gain-of-function research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology in Wuhan, China. Right, so that research was partially funded by EcoHealth Alliance, and it was partially run by Fauci's organization. And the name of Fauci's organization is the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, NIAID. So the NIAID and the USAID were the funders of the illegal gain-of-function research going on in the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Now I would like to step off the diving board into the deep end of conspiracy theory here. This is not something that is commonly accepted as true, but I can't help be suspicious because I notice that the COVID bailout packages all came at just the moment when the unwinding of quantitative easing from the 2008 era bailouts had been reversed in 2019 by the Federal Reserve. They were offloading debt instead of instead of buying bad debt at face value, they were trying to offload it to wind down their balance sheet, and it resulted in a crisis in the overnight repo markets, the overnight lending markets that the big banks use to trade deposits back and forth. The Fed had to rush in and bail them out to fix the overnight lending markets with a massive injection of capital, and then the sequel, of course, was the HEROES Act and the insane amount of money printing that went on during the COVID era.
Of course, these like overnight lends are like what crashed the economy back in 2012, right?
In
2011, like that whole like what happened was what dried up was the overnight lending markets, right? That was like the first thing that happened.
That was in 2019 that the overnight lending markets went boom in the night, and I don't remember that happening in 2012. You might be right, Brian. We'd have to double check the research on it. I only remember the subprime mortgage. Oh, okay. You're mixing up subprime and overnight lending. That's what's happening. The subprime mortgages, where the banks all went out and wrote mortgages to people who may not qualify for more, they may not have good enough credit or enough down payment or whatever. So we give them a crappy variable interest rate on their mortgage, and so the banks all sold these mortgage products to people who couldn't really afford them. They could afford them for the first couple of months, but then once the variable interest rates kicked in, the mortgages became hopeless and unaffordable. All
right. Well, so, that's what I believe. I mean, just on Planet Money, I believe back in the day, they were just talking about like leading up to that crisis was like the overnight lending markets drying up was like the first sign that things were going awry. I'm pretty darn sure that's the case.
If so, that would be a great thing for me to know. So I'm gonna have to look into that, Brian. That could, you may have made a really good point. We'll have to look under that rock though, because I haven't done so. Point here is simple. USAID is just a part of it's the way that the money gets from like the federal government that taxes us, and in the Federal Reserve prints money, how that gets into the hands of thousands of NGOs or non-governmental organizations. So this is where the rubber meets the road, USAID, where like federal funding gets into all these horribly corrupt. The Donald administration this week had a whole list of insane things that USAID was funding that don't make any sense, and so this is how the corrupt dollars actually get dispersed. USAID is the vehicle for that, and so of course that brings us up to this past week when the Elon Musk and his Doge account, his Department of Government account, what is it? Government I can't remember what Doge stands for.
Efficiency.
Department of Government Efficiency shut down USAID. Absolutely insane. On Tuesday, all the USAID's Washington facilities were closed. 10,000 employees that worked there last week is down to like a couple hundred now. Their whole $40 billion budget, $40 billion annual budget, it's all cut. So that's what's going on this week. It does seem like the Donald, like Captain Ahab, is plunging his harpoon into the white hump of the whale, the establishment that played so dirty, trying to keep him out of office for all these years. So that's interesting.
Yeah. So for the people with like Trump derangement syndrome, it seems like they're in an awkward spot because like everyone knows that we have like this bloated bureaucratic government that spends money on crazy things. And like, I just don't know, like it's all like exactly what you would expect.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, just like you remember when the Donald first got elected, there was like these reports about infighting between Elon Musk and Donald Trump, and there's some feud about who actually has the power. And of course, it seems like they're going in there, and I don't know, they're pretty much delivering like what they promised.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think it's awesome, right? I mean, the Democrats are going to be pushed into this position where the only thing they're can offer is like some actual equity for the American people.
That's the hope.
I mean, how are you going to defend? Like they have to just be like, well, Donald Trump, he's a Putin supporter and fascist, basically, is like the only thing they can try to offer besides some actual social programs.
Yeah, it does seem that at least part of the blob, the sinister unelected layer of bureaucracy that really runs this country, as opposed to the elected officials we think run it, it seems like they got handed a major defeat with this USAID closure. And I don't know how major it is, but given the history of USAID, which I just recounted, I have to think it's a pretty significant blow. But we'll see. It's a promising. It feels like a promising step in the right direction.
Well, I guess I'll talk about some Marxism here.
All right, lay it on us, Brian. You know, I love to hear some Marxism on the old System Failure podcast.
Well, I think maybe one thing that's wrong with Marxism is just that we want to imagine that there's going to be like the glorious revolution and then everything's going to be great. Whereas I think it's more reasonable to think about Marxism in terms of just like, the stock market chart with ebbs and flows. And so the government's gotten bloated and out of control, and you've had a backlash from the proletariat who have, voted out our reptilian overlords and put in someone else who's doing something. And so that is like a win for the home team. And I don't know, so it's just like this ebb and flow, right? And so, I mean, if you're like a Marxist, I think you should be happy, right?
Okay, yes, we should be happy. It does seem like a breath of fresh air. Brett Weinstein was on the JRE this past week, and he was saying that usually you just had to embrace wall-to-wall cynicism as a way of understanding what's going on in the world of politics and economics. But that since the Donald has taken over the past few weeks, we're not sure exactly what model we need to understand what's going on, but we can get rid of just the wall-to-wall cynicism. And at least, is this good? Is this bad? Right? We obviously there was a great article on the Wall Street Journal this week about how it used to be the liberals and lefties who were like always opposed to USAID, but now that the Donald's opposed to it, now we're for USAID. It's very funny, but you see, I voted for the crazy cat lady. The heart of Marxist theory is that the businesses are all they're all compensating their employees less than the actual value of their labor by definition. And that the advent of new technology is going to create a situation in which the working class can no longer negotiate for sufficient wages to purchase the products and services that they're creating, because the toll booth of the business owner who's who owns the business legally and rightfully, and so is taking a portion of each employee's value and not paying it back to them. That gap is just going to get wider and wider and wider with more technology. Fewer and fewer workers will be demanded. They'll have no way to collectively negotiate for enough money back from their employers to then buy the product. So the individual employers all think they're doing a good thing by cutting labor costs, but really they're eradicating the market for each other's products in a way that ultimately it's inevitable that we're going to need a different rubric for creating and distributing goods and services. I don't think that the Donald administration, what they're doing is a step in the right direction. It in no way addresses the core contradiction of capitalism that we're having to live through, particularly in the large language model AI era. And then there's the disturbing reality of, on top of that, of a fractional reserve lending system, which systematically creates $1 plus of debt for every $1 that it creates, so that there's always more debt than there is dollars of currency. And we're due for a debt collapse on that front as well. And again, the Donald administration is operating from within a capitalist paradigm and have no way to fix or to attenuate or ameliorate these looming crises of capitalism. And so I love the Donald's. I like that the Donald's funny. I have hope for some of his appointees like Gabbard and RFK Jr. I think maybe those guys, maybe RFK Jr. can just make it so that the food is at least palatable-ish. While we search for the ways to resolve the looming internal contradictions of capitalism that we find ourselves confronted with. So,
all right, but you understand what I'm saying, though, wherein the federal government's become bloated and does all these things that's not good for the people. And
absolutely.
And I guess I just don't think that. The system of owners and employees, I just don't really think is gonna. There's just always going to be people at the top. It's the nature of the hierarchy, and we've talked about this a bunch. And so, I guess I think it's a problem with Marxist thought that we dangle the idea of a utopia out in front of people. The thing is that can be used against you because people seem to forget about that, just the hierarchical nature of human beings and whatnot.
Yeah.
But in any case, I guess, obviously, it's just like the stock market chart, right? So, we're kind of having a bit of a correction here towards the proletariat. I mean, it's going to be good for the people at any rate for the government to not be doing like crazy things. And so, yeah, I mean, obviously the fractional reserve system isn't going away in the near future, and there's this employee people aren't getting paid enough. It's still an issue, and no one can afford a homes. So those are definitely problems. But I mean, we have stabbed a dagger into the heart of the beast here. It seems, right?
Yeah, they took one shot, but I mean, the argument you just laid out, the anti-utopian argument, you could deploy that for any of the, like, during the, let's say 1375, when the medieval economic system is in a state of collapse. You could say, well, this system of lords and serfs, it may not be perfect, is a hierarchical system, and we can never escape from hierarchy. So therefore, we should not turn the page and proceed into the modern era where economics is done by banks loaning money to entrepreneurs who then bring the technology of scientists to market in such a way that people wear either the employee or the employer hat. Like, when we change to a new system, when we went from lords and serfs to employees and employers, and when we move on to a new system, it will not be utopia. It will be trading one set of problems for another, right? Obviously, the transition from the feudal economy of the Middle Ages to the capitalist economy of the modern era certainly is not utopian. You could think of it as utopian. If someone from 1375 would certainly look at today's society and could be forgiven for thinking of it as utopian. But really, we just traded the problems of feudalism for the problems of capitalism. But overall, I would say that the problems of capitalism are a damn sight better than the problems of feudalism, and that the next system, the problems of that system, will be better than the problems of capitalism. So yeah, I don't think we want to get lost in utopianism. That's a really simplistic way to compress Marxism down. I don't think that the works of any of the works of, like, if you read Karl Marx, you're not going to get the sense of utopianism. But you will get a sense of inevitability, right? Obviously, if capitalists collectively eradicate the markets for their own products, then we'll have to find some new rubric for producing and distributing goods and services. And so that the inevitability, I do think that I definitely share the inevitability of Marx's analysis, but I do not share any utopian vision that I just don't think that that's a healthy or good way to think about changing systems. We're just hopefully gonna trade one raft of problems for another smaller raft of problems. I think that's how we should think of it. But
there's just this way in which I guess like liberals get I would identify as like a liberal, like any sane liberal, like abandoned the Democratic Party probably when Obama got reelected. I mean, if you were like smart.
Well, there's like a lefty and then there's like a liberal, and I think of liberal as being whatever the Democratic Party wants us to be. Not lefty, right? Because the Democratic Party has all these corporate donors. They don't want any like increased taxes on corporations of the wealthy, right? The Democratic Party is fully in line with all of the excesses of the Republican parties in terms of that, in terms of foreign policy and how we're going to treat our rich. But
well, I mean, you've got like Liz Warren and Bernie Sanders like embarrassing themselves in this RFK nomination. And the guy like wanted to run as a Democrat, but he's been cut out by the Democratic Party. And well, I mean, Liz Warren was saying she doesn't take money from like the vaccine industry or the medical industrial complex. And the fact check on Twitter is that she does. So I don't know in what way she could say she doesn't get those donations.
Because they give it to a PAC first. The Big Pharma gives the money to a super PAC. The super PAC gives it to Liz Warren, and Liz Warren gets to tell you that she doesn't accept money from Big Pharma. That's exactly how it works.
Well, anyway, I don't know. Like, I just think about the people, like what's wrong with the people on the left where they can't like see that like what's going on now is good, right? And so I guess I'm trying to say something about Marxism that will maybe help those people bridge the gap, I guess.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I like that. Keep going.
I don't know. I guess that's it. So I don't know. I don't know how you could I don't know what Sam Harris is saying on his podcast.
One can only imagine. Ugh, poor Sam Harris.
But I just don't know how you don't see. Yeah, this is like good.
Well, I think that was a really good point. So if you don't mind, I would just like to try to restate it.
Please.
the way to you want to make a differentiation between lefties and liberals, right? So that lefties can see, I think that lefties can see that what the Donald's doing here is at least a step in the right direction. But liberals think that the Donald is Hitler because that's what MSNBC has told them and what the apparatus of the DNC is telling them, right? Which is fascinating when the DNC is totally acting like this is they're not going out of their way. They're not acting at all like it's the second coming of Hitler. They're doing the normal things you do during an inauguration season. They're not acting like it's the emergency they assured us it was in the lead up to the election, like the death of do any of the Democratic senators seem like are they behaving as if the death of democracy is at hand? Certainly not, right? They're going to the White House, they're going to the inaugurations, they're doing all the things.
Well, Jimmy Dore calls them shit libs.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
And so I don't know. I don't really know how to differentiate between liberals and lefties or what it is, but there's the sort of person who wants good things for people, but believes the propaganda about the Donald being a fascist, and they see Tony Hinchcliffe make a joke about Puerto Rico and think that it's a Nazi rally being held at Madison Square Garden.
Yeah.
And I don't know. We need ways to help people not fall for that crazy propaganda. And anyway, I think it seems like the Donald Trump is making it hard for those people to live in that narrative. So hopefully reality comes crashing in. I don't know. I heard someone... this is probably some Trumpism, but someone said that, the Donald Trump's administration's here. Well, it's like the Star Wars. You had A New Hope, and then the Empire Struck Back, and now we're in Return of the Jedi. It is funny how, the Donald ran the first time, he ran on, draining the swamp. And what we got was a lot of QAnon talk, and that guy who went in and shot up the pizza place.
We also got massive tax cuts for the wealthy.
Yeah. Well, they're not draining the swamp isn't this crazy buzzword right now, and the Donald subreddit hasn't taken over Reddit, which I guess was probably
is there the Donald subreddit?
It's been banned.
It's been banned, but in 2016 it was vibrant.
Yeah, well, it took over Reddit.
Yeah,
and that kind of Trumpism was not really productive. But obviously, it's awesome that they're not. No one's saying draining the swamp, but this USAID business is completely insane.
That's a great point. This is a preeminent example of swamp draining. You're right. I never made that connection. That's really good.
Yeah. So I don't know. We should be going on Reddit and saying drain the swamp or something, or I don't know. It's I can't believe it's happening.
Yeah. Hopefully folks can be encouraged. Boy, I don't know what to make of Musk though. He seems like I don't think he was trying to evoke the Third Reich with his gestures, but the things he does are so erratic and weird. The way that when you hear guys like Brett Weinstein talk about their personal interactions, or Sam Harris talk about their personal interactions with Musk, the man seems like he's just not operating normally. I don't know what to make of it, but I feel like this USAID thing is a major step in the right direction, to echo your sentiment, Brian, and I just hope that we don't throw too many valuable babies out with that corrupt bathwater. I think that in the final analysis, everyone will agree that that getting rid of USAID is a great thing. Let's just hope it's not replaced by an organization that does the exact same thing. And let's hope we don't ever return to business as usual, and that this is the beginning of a lot of a change in the political landscape of the United States. I'd like to believe so. I guess all we can do is wait and see, huh?
I mean, I don't want to be terribly naive, but it seems like... I guess Elon Musk seems like a competent guy. He does seem crazy, and a lot of these people do. Mark Zuckerberg seems like a crazy person also.
These people, man.
But, Elon Musk seems like a guy who knows how to make things happen. Certainly there are things about him that you could critique. But I don't... the USAID, it's completely insane.
Yeah. I think just talking about the USAID and the way that they behaved in 14 and 20 really paints a picture where you go, we're going to be way better off for this. Hopefully the people around the rest of the world will be way better off without American dollars screwing up their local elections.
Well, yeah. So either the Democrats are going to have to come up with like an actually good counteroffer to what the Donald's doing here, or it's going to be more Trump is fascism, and which I don't think is going to work. So either way, it seems like we're headed for a more positive future.
Yeah. Well, I think that pretty much says it, Brian. And I think we're coming up against the limits of our time here as well. So I think it's time for me to do my weekly exhortation and invite all of our valued System Failure audience to head on over to systemfailure.org. There you can read the weekly essays on Christianity and a great many other fascinating topics. And you can also get in touch with Brian and me over at systemfailure.org. So by all means, check it out. We hope to see you online.
All right, we'll see you.